Captain Sarah Chen adjusted her headset as the translation software struggled with the weak signal coming from the derelict space station. Most of the Galactic Council's exploration teams would have marked this sector as empty space and moved on. The massive structure floating in the void between star systems showed no signs of advanced technology, no energy signatures that would interest the major civilizations. To the Zephyrians, Korathi, and other dominant species, this was just space junk, but humans had learned to look closer. "Commander, I'm picking up life signs," reported Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez from the sensor station. "Faint, but definitely organic. The readings are unusual." Sarah leaned forward in her captain's chair aboard the UES Discovery. 3 years into humanity's membership in the Galactic Council, they had earned a reputation as the species that investigated what others ignored. While the ancient civilizations fought over resource-rich worlds and strategic positions, humans seemed drawn to mysteries and forgotten corners of space. "Unusual how?" Sarah asked. Marcus frowned at his displays. "The biosignatures are consistent with a sapient species, but they're reading as extremely primitive. No technology above basic metallurgy. It's like finding Stone Age humans living in a space station." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's xenobiologist, looked up from her research terminal. "That doesn't make sense. How would a pre-technological species end up in orbit between star systems?" The space station ahead of them was enormous, easily the size of a small city. Its hull was composed of an unknown metallic alloy that had somehow resisted centuries of micrometeorite impacts and radiation. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, but no lights emanated from within. No response came to their communication attempts. "Take us in closer," Sarah ordered, "but keep our shields up and weapons ready." As the Discovery approached, more details became visible. The station's design was unlike anything in the galactic databases. Where most advanced civilizations favored clean lines and efficient geometries, this structure seemed to grow organically, with flowing curves and spiral passages visible through transparent sections. Gardens could be seen through some of the windows, somehow still green and alive despite the apparent abandonment. "Captain, I'm detecting movement inside," Marcus reported. "Lots of it. Whatever's living in there, there are thousands of them." Dr. Vasquez activated her external sensors, focusing on the life sign readings. "Fascinating. The biosignatures are showing signs of genetic manipulation, but not the kind used by any known species. This looks like someone tried to enhance their subjects for survival in harsh environments, but the work is incredibly crude by current standards." "Or incredibly old," Sarah murmured. She had studied the histories of the major galactic civilizations, and she knew that most of them had darker periods in their past. Could this be the result of some abandoned experiment? Before anyone could answer, a new signal came through their communications array. Not the sophisticated quantum entanglement networks used by council species, but simple radio waves. The translation matrix worked frantically to decode the message. "Please, help. Dying. Children sick. No medicine." The bridge fell silent. Sarah felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. This was why humans had joined the Galactic Council, despite being one of the youngest and weakest species. This was why they took the assignments that others considered beneath them. "Dr. Vasquez, prepare a medical team," Sarah commanded. "Marcus, scan for docking ports. We're going aboard." "Captain," her first officer, Commander Zhang, interjected carefully, "we should probably report this to the Council first. If this is related to some experiment by one of the major civilizations, then they'll want to cover it up," Sarah finished. "No, we help first, ask questions later. It's the human way." The docking procedure took several hours. The station's ports were designed for ships with completely different architecture, forcing the engineering team to improvise adapters. During the wait, Dr. Vasquez worked with the translation matrix to establish better communication with the inhabitants. What they learned was heartbreaking. The beings called themselves the Kethani, which roughly translated to the small voices. They had been living on the station for over 300 years, ever since their creators had abandoned them. Their messages spoke of failing systems, diseases they couldn't cure, and children dying because the medical facilities no longer functioned properly. They keep asking about the tall builders who made them, Dr. Vasquez reported. From their descriptions, I'd say we're looking at the results of a genetic engineering project. Someone took a primitive species and modified them for life in space, then left them here to fend for themselves. Sarah gritted her teeth. She had seen the casual cruelty that advanced civilizations could display toward species they considered inferior. Most council members viewed genetic manipulation as their right when dealing with lesser beings. When the docking was finally complete, Sarah led a small team through the airlock. The artificial gravity inside the station was weaker than Earth normal, and the air mixture was slightly off, but their environmental suits compensated. The corridors they walked through showed signs of loving maintenance despite obvious material shortages. The walls had been patched and repatched, and improvised repairs held failing systems together. The first Kethani they encountered was tending to a small garden in what had once been a sophisticated hydroponic facility. The being was roughly humanoid, but smaller, perhaps 4 feet tall, with large eyes adapted for low-light conditions and delicate hands perfect for detailed work. When it saw the humans, it immediately prostrated itself. "Tall builders return!" it cried in its whistling language. "Small voices grateful. Small voices obey." Dr. Vasquez knelt down to the creature's level. "We're not your creators," she said gently through the translator. "We're humans. We came because we heard your distress call." The Kethani looked confused. "Not tall builders? But you listened to small voices." "Yes," Sarah said, also kneeling. "We listened, and we want to help." Word spread quickly through the station. Soon dozens of Kethani had gathered, all staring at the humans with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Many were clearly ill, their breathing labored, and their movements weak. Children hid behind adults, too thin and too quiet. Dr. Vasquez immediately began medical scans while the engineering team assessed the station's failing life support systems. The problems were extensive but not insurmountable. The Kethani had been remarkably resourceful in keeping their home functional, but they lacked the knowledge and materials to perform major repairs. "Captain," Dr. Vasquez called over the comm, "you need to see this." Sarah followed the doctor deeper into the station to what appeared to be a records room. Ancient holographic displays flickered weakly, showing images and data in a language the translation matrix couldn't decode. "I've been working with one of their historians," Dr. Vasquez explained. "The Kethani were created by a species called the Veltar as workers for deep space construction projects. But when the Veltar joined the Galactic Council 200 years ago, they abandoned all their primitive projects to focus on more sophisticated endeavors." On the displays, images showed the station in its glory days. Thousands of Kethani working together, building structures in space, their large eyes and dexterous hands perfectly suited for delicate construction work in zero gravity. They had been living tools, created for a specific purpose and discarded when no longer needed. "The worst part," Dr. Vasquez continued, "is that they're dying out. The genetic modifications that allow them to live in space also cause reproductive problems. Their population has been declining for decades." Sarah studied the images of healthy, thriving Kethani from centuries past. "Can we fix the genetic issues?" "Given time and resources, yes. But Captain, there's something else." Dr. Vasquez activated another display. "I've found references to other stations like this one, dozens of them, scattered across space, all abandoned by their creators." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Across the galaxy, there could be thousands or millions of abandoned engineered beings, slowly dying in forgotten corners of space, while their creators lived in luxury as members of the Galactic Council. Over the next week, the crew of the Discovery worked around the clock to stabilize the Kethani's situation. They repaired life support systems, provided medical care, and established communication links that would allow the station to call for help. The Kethani worked alongside them eagerly, their intelligence and skill becoming more apparent as they gained confidence. The breakthrough came when young Kethani named Zixtel showed Commander Jang a section of the station the humans hadn't seen before. Hidden behind what appeared to be a maintenance panel was a workshop where the Kethani had been secretly developing new technologies. Small voices, not just workers, Zixtel explained proudly. Small voices learn, small voices create. The workshop contained devices that made Zhang whistle in appreciation. Micro-manufacturing tools that could work at the molecular level, gravitational manipulation devices that the Council's best scientists would envy, and most remarkably, a prototype for faster-than-light communication that didn't rely on quantum entanglement. "Captain," Zhang called excitedly, "you need to see this. The Kethani aren't just survivors, they're innovators. In 300 years of isolation, they've developed technologies that could revolutionize space travel." Sarah examined the devices, her mind racing. The Galactic Council maintained its power through control of advanced technology. If word got out that an abandoned species had developed innovations that surpassed Council capabilities, the major civilizations would do anything to suppress the information. That evening, Sarah called a meeting with her senior staff in the Discovery's conference room. Through the viewports, they could see the station, now brightly lit and bustling with activity, as Kethani and humans worked together. "We have a problem," Sarah began. "If we report this to the Council as required, the Kethani will become a target. The major civilizations won't allow an inferior species to possess advanced technology." Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly. "I've been researching the histories of other species that developed innovations beyond their supposed capabilities. They all met unfortunate ends. Plagues, civil wars, mysterious accidents." "So what do we do?" asked Commander Zhang. "We can't just ignore Council protocols." Sarah looked out at the station where human and Kethani children were playing together in the observation deck, their laughter carrying across the communication channels. "We protect them. It's what humans do." The plan they developed was risky, but elegant. The Discovery would report finding a derelict station with a small population of survivors from an unknown species. No mention of advanced technology or the Veltar connection. Meanwhile, they would quietly establish a network to support and protect other abandoned populations they might find. "It won't be easy," Sarah warned her crew. "We'll be operating outside official channels, using our own resources. Command might not approve." Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke up from the back of the room. "Ma'am, with respect, since when have humans ever let official approval stop us from doing the right thing?" A week later, the Discovery departed the station, leaving behind medical supplies, repair materials, and most importantly, a promise. The Kethani waved goodbye from their observation decks, no longer the desperate, dying people they had found. They had hope now, and allies who saw them as more than abandoned experiments. As the stars streaked past the Discovery's viewports, Sarah studied the star charts with new purpose. Somewhere out there were dozens of other stations, other abandoned peoples waiting for someone to notice them. The major civilizations of the Galactic Council might overlook these forgotten ones in their pursuit of power and resources, but humans would find them. Humans would help them, and maybe, just maybe, humans would discover that the galaxy's greatest treasures weren't the ones hoarded by the powerful, but the ones discarded by the blind. 6 months after the discovery of the Kethani, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the cargo bay of the UES Discovery, watching as volunteers loaded medical supplies and construction materials. Word had spread quietly through the human fleet about their mission to find and aid abandoned populations. What had started as one ship's initiative had grown into an underground network of vessels, scientists, and engineers, all committed to the same cause. The official reports filed with the Galactic Council made no mention of the growing operation. As far as the major civilizations knew, human ships were simply conducting routine deep space surveys in sectors deemed unimportant by Council standards. The truth was far more significant. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached Sarah with a datapad containing their latest discoveries. "We've confirmed the existence of 17 more stations and installations," she reported. "The Veltar weren't the only ones who abandoned their engineered populations. We've found evidence of similar practices by the Zephyrians, the Korathi, and at least 4 other Council species." Sarah studied the map displayed on the datapad. Red dots marked confirmed locations of abandoned populations, while yellow indicators showed potential sites requiring investigation. The scope of the problem was staggering. "How many people are we talking about?" Sarah asked. "Conservative estimates put the number at over 2 million sapient beings scattered across more than 50 locations," Dr. Vasquez replied. "And those are just the ones we've identified so far." The discovery of the Kethani had been just the beginning. Each rescued population had provided clues about others, creating a trail that led deeper into the galaxy's hidden history. The humans had found the Silnari, aquatic beings abandoned on a water world after their creators decided oceanic mining was unprofitable. They had rescued the Morden, crystalline entities left behind when their masters discovered cheaper alternatives to their unique manufacturing abilities. Each group had their own tragic story of abandonment and survival. Commander Zhang entered the cargo bay, carrying a secure communication device. "Sarah, we're getting a priority message from the Kethani station. It's encrypted using their new communication protocol." The message, when decoded, was brief but urgent. Zixtel's voice came through clearly. "Human friends, danger comes. Council ships approaching our sector. Veltar warships with scanning equipment. Small voices hide but need help soon." Sarah felt her stomach clench. This was what they had feared would happen eventually. Despite their careful precautions, someone had noticed the pattern of human activity in supposedly empty sectors. "How much time do we have?" Sarah asked. "The Kethani estimate 3 days before the Veltar arrive at their location," Zhang replied. "They're requesting evacuation protocols." Dr. Vasquez shook her head. "We can't evacuate 2,000 beings without attracting attention. And where would we take them? Any human colony would be monitored by the Council." Sarah paced the cargo bay, her mind working through possibilities. The network they had built was impressive but still fragile. If the Council discovered what humanity was doing, it would mean the end of their protection efforts and likely severe sanctions against human space. "What's the status of the other locations?" Sarah asked. Zhang consulted his datapad. "The Silnari are secure for now. Their world is in a nebula that interferes with sensors. The Morden have been relocated to asteroid installations that appear as natural formations. But we have 6 other populations that could be discovered if the Council starts systematic searches." An idea began forming in Sarah's mind. Risky, audacious, but potentially brilliant. "What if we don't hide them?" she said. "What if we make them visible in a way the Council can't ignore?" Dr. Vasquez looked confused. "I don't understand." "The Council maintains power by controlling information and resources," Sarah explained. "But they also depend on public opinion within their own populations. What if the galaxy learned about these abandoned peoples? What if everyone knew that Council species had created sapient beings and then left them to die?" Commander Zhang caught on quickly. "A publicity campaign. But how do we get that information out without revealing our involvement?" "We don't hide our involvement," Sarah said. "We make it the point. Humanity, the newest and supposedly weakest council member, protecting populations that the major civilizations abandoned. It's a story that writes itself." The plan they developed over the next 18 hours was unprecedented in galactic politics. Using the Kethani's advanced communication technology, they would simultaneously broadcast the story of the abandoned populations to every major news network, academic institution, and government in council space. The broadcasts would include interviews with the survivors, documentation of their creators' abandonment, and evidence of the innovative technologies they had developed in isolation. The key was timing. They needed to release everything at once, making it impossible for any single government to suppress the information before it spread. Dr. Vasquez coordinated with research teams across the network to compile evidence. "We need testimonies from survivors, archaeological evidence of the original settlements, and documentation of the technologies they've developed," she explained to the assembled volunteers. "Everything has to be verifiable and overwhelming." Meanwhile, the engineering teams worked to establish secure communication links with allied journalists and scientists throughout council space. The Kethani's quantum-resistant communication protocols proved invaluable, allowing them to send encrypted data that even the most advanced council surveillance systems couldn't intercept. The human merchant vessel UES Prosperity, commanded by Captain Maria Santos, had been monitoring Veltar military movements. Her report was grim. 3 dreadnoughts and a full science fleet, Sarah. They're not just investigating, they're preparing for a full military operation. Someone high up in the Veltar hierarchy wants this situation resolved permanently. As the countdown to the broadcast approached, Sarah found herself in the Kethani station's central hub, surrounded by the beings her species had chosen to protect. Zixtel approached her with something she had never seen before, a Kethani wearing what appeared to be formal attire. "Small voices choose speaker for tall humans," Zixtel explained. "Elder Nimara will tell Galaxy about Small Voices' story." Elder Nimara was ancient by Kethani standards, having lived through the entire period of abandonment. Her large eyes held depths of sadness, but also unmistakable dignity. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of survival. "Human friend Sarah," she said, "Small Voices grateful for gift of hope, but Small Voices also understand danger you face. Council species not like being reminded of shameful past." "We know the risks," Sarah replied, "but it's the right thing to do." "Yes," Nimara agreed. "Small Voices also think is right thing. We tell truth no matter consequences. Truth has power even tall builders fear." The broadcast began at exactly 1400 Galactic Standard Time, coordinated across 17 different time zones and 43 different communication networks. The opening segment featured Dr. Vasquez providing historical context, followed by Elder Nimara's testimony about the Kethani's abandonment and survival. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On Zephyr Prime, the opposition party demanded an emergency session of the Planetary Council to address rumors about abandoned Zephyrian experiments. The Korathi Stellar Assembly found itself inundated with calls from journalists seeking comments about allegations of genetic manipulation and abandonment. Academic institutions across the galaxy began emergency reviews of their xenobiological archives, but it was the technology demonstrations that truly captured galactic attention. When Zixtel showed how Kethani micromanufacturing could produce complex devices at the molecular level, industrial specialists across the galaxy took notice. The revelation that these supposedly primitive beings had developed faster-than-light communication without quantum entanglement sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Within 6 hours, the story had become the leading news item on every major network in council space. The phrase "the abandoned ones" trended across social media platforms in 16 different languages. The council's response was swift but confused. Used to controlling information flow, they found themselves unable to contain a story that had launched simultaneously from hundreds of sources. Their attempts to dismiss the reports as human propaganda were undermined by the overwhelming evidence and the compelling testimonies of the survivors themselves. Admiral Kethvar of the Veltar fleet found himself in an impossible position. His orders had been to quietly eliminate any evidence of the abandoned Kethani population. But with galactic attention focused on their sector, any military action would be seen as confirmation of the allegations. Sarah watched the news coverage from the Kethani station's command center, surrounded by beings who had gone from forgotten victims to galactic celebrities in a matter of hours. The transformation was remarkable. Kethani, who had spent their lives believing they were unwanted failures, now stood proudly before camera drones, explaining their innovations and sharing their culture. The political implications became clear within days. Opposition parties in every major council government seized on the story to attack their ruling establishments. Protests erupted on worlds where populations learned that their governments had funded genetic manipulation projects and then abandoned the results. The carefully maintained facade of council benevolence began to crack. Dr. Elena Vasquez monitored the academic response from her mobile laboratory. "The xenobiological community is in chaos," she reported to Sarah. "Researchers are demanding access to all historical genetic manipulation records. Several universities are organizing expeditions to confirm our findings." The most significant development came from an unexpected source. The Thiorian Republic, a mid-level council member, announced that they would provide protection and resources to any abandoned population that requested it. Their statement, clearly calculated to embarrass the major powers, sparked a cascade of similar announcements from other governments. "It's becoming a competition," Commander Zhang observed. "No one wants to be seen as supporting the abandonment policies." Within a week, the Galactic Council found itself forced to address the situation formally. Emergency sessions were called, and for the first time in decades, the major civilizations faced serious challenges to their authority from their own populations and smaller council members. The Veltar government, faced with undeniable evidence of their abandonment of the Kethani, announced a formal apology and offered to provide reparations. Similar announcements followed from other implicated species, each trying to minimize their culpability while appearing responsive to public pressure. But Sarah knew that the real victory wasn't in the political maneuvering or even the immediate aid being offered to the abandoned populations. The real victory was in the transformation she saw in the beings themselves. The Kethani no longer called themselves small voices. They had found their strength, their pride, their place in the galaxy. As Admiral Kethvar's fleet withdrew from the sector, their mission officially redesignated as a humanitarian assessment, Sarah received a message that brought tears to her eyes. It was from the Silnari, transmitted from their ocean world through channels the Council had never discovered. "Deep currents carry word of brave humans who protect forgotten children of stars," the message read in flowing poetic language. "We who swim in darkness see light coming. Soon all abandoned ones will be abandoned no more." The network they had built in secret was becoming something larger and more powerful than Sarah had ever imagined. Across the galaxy, forgotten peoples were learning that they were not alone, that someone cared enough to fight for them. The galaxy would never be the same. 2 years after the first broadcast that shook the galactic political establishment, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see a sight that would have been impossible to imagine when this all began. Dozens of ships from across the galaxy, representing both major council species and the formerly abandoned populations, working together on joint research projects. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Keth-Ani micro-manufacturing techniques had been combined with Silnari organic architecture and Morden crystalline computing systems to create something entirely new. Human engineering provided the structural framework that brought it all together. But the real innovation came from species that the galaxy had written off as failures. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached Sarah with a datapad containing the latest census reports. "The final numbers are in," she announced with satisfaction. "We've located and established contact with 87 distinct populations of abandoned peoples. Total population, just over 12 million sapient beings." Sarah shook her head in amazement. The scale of abandonment across the galaxy had been even worse than their initial estimates. But the response had been equally impressive. The revelation of the abandoned populations had triggered what historians were already calling the Great Awakening, a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization viewed genetic manipulation and corporate responsibility. "What's the status of the integration programs?" Sarah asked. "Better than expected," Dr. Vasquez replied. 43 populations have chosen to establish formal diplomatic relationships with council governments. 22 have formed their own independent collective. The remaining groups are still deciding their futures, but they all have support networks now. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. The initial enthusiasm from council governments had faded as the practical implications became clear. Providing reparations and support to millions of abandoned beings was expensive, and many politicians had tried to minimize their commitments once the media attention died down. That's where the abandoned populations themselves had surprised everyone. Commander Jang joined them on the observation deck, having just returned from a tour of the research laboratories. "Sarah, you need to see what the Keth-Ani team has developed now," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "They've created a manufacturing process that can convert asteroid material directly into complex electronics. No rare earth elements required, no toxic byproducts, and the efficiency rate is 3 times higher than current council technology." This was the pattern that had emerged over the past 2 years. Each abandoned population, given resources and recognition, had proven to be a source of incredible innovation. The Silnari had developed biological computing systems that could grow and repair themselves. The Mordun had created new materials that were stronger than any known alloys. The Thisakai, discovered on a tidally locked world, had mastered energy conversion techniques that made fusion power look primitive. The irony was overwhelming. The very beings that the major civilizations had discarded as inferior were now driving technological advancement across the galaxy. Sarah's contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Earth. Admiral Patricia Hayes, the head of Starfleet operations, appeared on the holographic display with a grave expression. "Sarah, we have a problem," Admiral Hayes began without preamble. "The Council's Security Directorate has filed formal charges against you and several other human commanders. They're alleging violation of interspecies protocols, unauthorized first contact procedures, and interference with internal council affairs." Sarah had been expecting this for months. As the abandoned populations gained influence and recognition, the major civilizations had grown increasingly uncomfortable with humanity's role in their elevation. The fact that humans, as one of the newest and supposedly weakest council members, had exposed the shameful practices of ancient civilizations was a source of constant embarrassment. "What are the specifics?" Sarah asked. "They want you to appear before a special tribunal," Admiral Hayes replied. "The charges could result in humanity being expelled from the Galactic Council and severe restrictions being placed on human space travel." Dr. Vasquez looked alarmed. "They can't do that. Without human intervention, millions of beings would have died in isolation." "The law isn't always about justice, Elena," Sarah said quietly. "It's about power, and we've disrupted a lot of power structures." Commander Zhang activated another communication channel. "Admiral, I think you should see this before making any decisions about Captain Chen's response to the charges." The display shifted to show a live feed from the Galactic Council chambers. Elder Nim'ara of the Keth-Ani stood at the central podium, her small figure dwarfed by the massive assembly hall. But her voice, enhanced by translation technology, carried clearly throughout the chamber. "Honored representatives," she was saying, "small voices no longer small. We speak now with voices given strength by human friends. We speak for all abandoned children of stars." Behind her, holographic displays showed representatives from dozens of the formerly abandoned populations. Silnari swimming in their mobile tanks, Mordoon crystalline beings pulsing with inner light, and many others that Sarah recognized from their rescue operations. "Council brings charges against humans who saved us," Nim'ara continued. "Council says humans broke laws, but what of laws broken when Council members created us and left us to die? What of laws broken when children starved while creators lived in luxury?" The chamber erupted in chaos. The Veltar representative tried to interrupt, but was shouted down by delegates from the smaller Council worlds. The Thyorian ambassador stood and demanded recognition. "The Thyorian Republic calls for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current Security Directorate," the Thyorian declared. "We propose that any tribunal investigating human actions must also investigate the abandonment policies that made those actions necessary." What followed was a political earthquake. One by one, the smaller council members and several major civilizations announced their support for the Thyorian proposal. The Karathi delegation walked out in protest, followed by the Zephyrians. The ancient coalition that had dominated galactic politics for millennia was fracturing before everyone's eyes. Admiral Hayes watched the proceedings with amazement. "Sarah, I think your legal problems just became the least of everyone's concerns." The session continued for hours, with passionate speeches from representatives of the abandoned populations and their supporters. The moment that would be remembered by historians came when Zixtel, now serving as the Kethani's chief technology officer, activated a holographic display showing the innovations their people had developed. "Small voices offer gifts to Galaxy," Zixtel announced. "Not because we must, but because we choose. Because human friends taught us that beings help beings, not because of laws or power, but because it is right thing to do." The display showed technical specifications for dozens of revolutionary technologies: zero-point energy extractors, faster-than-light communication networks, molecular assemblers, and medical devices that could regenerate tissue at the cellular level. The combined value of these innovations was incalculable. "We share freely with all who embrace philosophy of protection and cooperation," Zixtel continued. "We keep from those who see other beings as tools to be used and abandoned." The implications were immediate and clear. The abandoned populations, collectively, had become one of the most technologically advanced groups in the galaxy. Their offer to share their innovations with those who supported humanitarian principles while withholding them from the traditional power structures was a masterstroke of political maneuvering. Within days, a dozen major civilizations had formally apologized for their historical abandonment policies and pledged to support humanitarian principles. The remaining holdouts found themselves increasingly isolated as their own populations demanded access to the new technologies. Sarah watched these developments from Unity Station with a mixture of pride and amazement. The beings they had rescued had become a major political force, not through military might or economic pressure, but through moral authority and technological innovation. Dr. Vasquez joined her with the latest reports from across the galaxy. "The cascade effect is accelerating," she announced. "We're receiving reports of other civilizations coming forward to confess their own abandonment programs. Apparently, the practice was even more widespread than we thought." "How many more populations are we talking about?" Sarah asked. Conservative estimates suggest at least 50 million beings in various stages of abandonment, Dr. Vasquez replied. Some as recent as last year, others dating back over 1,000 years. The scope was staggering. For millennia, advanced civilizations had been creating modified beings for specific purposes, then discarding them when those purposes were fulfilled or better alternatives were found. It was a systematic practice that had affected entire species across the galaxy. But now, for the first time, there was hope for all of them. Commander Zhang activated a communication from Elder Nimara, who had remained on the Council homeworld to coordinate the political response. Her image appeared on the display, showing the tiredness of someone who had been negotiating for days, but also unmistakable satisfaction. "Human friend Sarah," Nimara said. "Small voices have proposal for Galaxy, new organization dedicated to finding and protecting all abandoned peoples, not controlled by council, not controlled by any single species. Democratic federation of all beings who choose cooperation over domination." Sarah felt a chill of excitement. What Nimara was describing wasn't just a humanitarian organization. It was an alternative to the existing galactic power structure. A coalition based on mutual aid and technological cooperation rather than dominance and resource extraction. "The major civilizations won't accept that," Sarah warned. "They'll see it as a direct threat to their authority." "Small voices no longer fear major civilizations," Nimara replied with quiet dignity. "We have friends now. We have technology. Most importantly, we have truth on our side. Galaxy tired of old ways. Time for new ways." Over the following months, the Federation of Allied Peoples was formally established. Its charter, written collectively by representatives from over 100 species, enshrined principles of mutual protection, technological cooperation, and democratic governance. The abandoned populations formed its core, but they were joined by several entire star systems that chose to leave the traditional council structure. Humanity played a crucial role in the Federation's formation, but not as leaders or controllers. Instead, humans served as facilitators and protectors, helping smaller species find their voices and defend their rights. It was a role that suited humanity's emerging identity in galactic affairs, not the strongest or most advanced, but perhaps the most willing to see the worth in others. The charges against Sarah and her fellow commanders were quietly dropped as the Galactic Council found itself dealing with more pressing concerns. Several major civilizations were facing internal rebellions as their own populations demanded reforms. The old order of genetic manipulation and abandonment was ending, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history. Standing on Unity Station's observation deck 5 years after her first encounter with the Cathani, Sarah watched ships from a dozen different species working together on a joint exploration mission. They were heading to the galactic rim, where long-range sensors had detected signs of abandoned populations that had been isolated for even longer than those they had already found. Dr. Vasquez approached with her usual datapad, but this time her expression was one of pure wonder. "Sarah, you're not going to believe the latest reports from the Rim expedition. They've found evidence of a civilization that abandoned their modified populations over 10,000 years ago. The descendants have developed technologies we can't even begin to understand." Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar excitement of discovery. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and forgotten peoples waiting for someone to notice them, to care about them, to help them find their place among the stars. "Prepare the ship, Elena," Sarah said. "We have work to do." Behind them, Unity Station hummed with the voices of beings from across the galaxy, former outcasts who had become the architects of a new age. They had learned the greatest human truth, that the measure of a civilization wasn't in its power over others, but in its willingness to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The forgotten ones would never be forgotten again.